So this presentation is about accuracy and neurocorrelates of blinded mediumship. And so that's some experiments we did at IONS over the past couple of years. And so I'm going to go through all the experiments we did, why we did them, and give you a little bit more insight about our methodology. And so we experience mental experiences all the time, smelling, hearing, seeing things. And we ask people during meditation, what kind of experience do they have? So this is a survey we've published in PLOS ONE about 2 years ago, where we surveyed about 1,200 people. And during meditation, some people said they experienced non-physical entities, clairvoyance or telepathy, a connection with a guru. And this was actually relatively common. More than half of the people had this experience during meditation. Not necessarily often, but they have at least 50% had it once. So that's a common, these kind of paranormal experiences are claimed to be relatively common. And the reason I was personally interested in channeling and mediumship is first, it's common, and there's lots of people who claim to have these capabilities and to be psychics and mediums. It's the only recognized paranormal job. And in comparison to psychics, mediums are relatively easy to test. They're trying to convince, if you're the client, they're trying to convince you that they're in contact with your deceased relatives. So they're going to try to bring in a lot of evidential information. Also, it involves extreme emotions, such as the one associated with death, which usually triggers the most spontaneous paranormal reports. Also, when we started, there were also already reputable study, in particular the work of Julie Beischel and Gary Schwartz, and also the work that's done at University UVA. And so here, the hypothesis for doing these experiments was not necessarily to explain mediumship, more to assess whether they could have access to any kind of anomalous information, which could potentially generate to other side effects. And so this is the type of studies we do at IONS on channeling. This is called the IONS channeling program, and I already talked about that. And this is like this part. Can we verify the information? So there's lots of other parts. Eleni has talked about these parts. There's parts she hasn't had time to talk about. And we have recorded lectures, so I invite you to look at these recorded lectures if you're interested in all of these different segments. And here I'm going to show you 3 different experiments we did. So we call them, it's not very original, we call them Mediumship 1, Mediumship 2, and Mediumship 3. And so this is the first one we did. This one we did with in collaboration with Julie Beischel at the Windbridge Institute. And mediums came to the lab. We actually flew them from all over the US. They came to the lab. They spent a short time meditating. And then we asked them, okay, now connect to a deceased individual. We gave them the first name. And then we asked them 25 questions about that individual. We randomized the questions. Types of questions was what was their occupation, what was their body type, all kinds of questions about their personality, etc. And so the mediums, so we gave him just a first name, and it was double blind in the sense that the person asking the question didn't know anything about the person they were asking for. So they just had a first name and just conducting the interview. And then once we had the answer, we sent back the answer to the person that wanted the reading. And we also sent them back what we call a decoy reading, which was a reading that was not meant for them, but we changed the name. So, so they had to judge whether the answers for the reading that was meant for them and the answers for the reading that wasn't meant for them was different. And this is very similar to the type of experiments Patricio talked about this morning, because he also used a similar methodology. And so then we compare the accuracy on the target readings, which were meant for the person that wanted the reading, versus the decoy reading, which was a reading they had to judge, but that wasn't meant for them. And of course, they didn't know when they were doing the judging, but which one was meant for them. And the reason we do that is that some people might be overly enthusiastic. For example, if the medium says, oh, I see the occupation of that person was to be a plumber, and then the actual occupation is to be an electrician. Some people were very enthusiastic, would say, oh, this is almost the same trade. I'm going to rate that extremely high. And some other people might say, oh, no, that's very different. This is plumber, this is electrician, completely different jobs. One has to do with water, the other electricity, and they're going to rate this very low. So this way, by having the two, we can compare, how enthusiastic they are in responding to questions, because obviously they're going to answer the two sets of questions in the same kind of way. And you see here for the 4 medium we had, they were always, for the target, they were always above the decoy. The performance was always above the decoy. We also recorded their brainwaves. So we used the 32-channel cap, and these are some representation of brainwaves. Then we extracted the amplitude of different brainwaves, so alpha, beta, gamma, etc. And then so we did that at every single what we call channel location. So here this is a representation of the head. You have the nose, the ears, and then with these numbers, which represent the amplitude of a brainwave at a given frequency, we can construct like an elevation map and look at that from the top, and then we see which region of the brain. I mean, here it's on the scalp, but which region of the scalp have higher or lower amplitude brainwave. When it's blue, it means it's low in the landscape, it's low amplitude brainwave, and when it's red, it means high in the landscape, it's high amplitude brainwave. We can also project that in 3D on the head of the subject, or a template head. And so here what we saw is that we took all the responses. This is just one of the medium. We took all the responses and we compare, okay, is there a difference in the brain when people answer the question well compared to when they answer the question not as well, when they're highly accurate versus not accurate. And because we had a lot of questions, we were able to run this kind of analysis. And you see here it's almost the same. So we have low performance versus high performance, but there's differences. And when we run some statistical analysis, let's see here. When we run some statistical analysis, we can see in this region, these electrodes are significantly different. And of course, this is after correcting for the fact that we do multiple comparison. And so the way we interpret this is that this is in the theta frequency band, so this is about 5 hertz. And this region is well known to be linked with working memory, which means higher activity in this region is linked to remembering numbers, for example. If I ask you to remember 1 number, 2 numbers, 3 numbers, 4 numbers, the higher the number I ask you to remember, the higher the activity will be in this region. And that's a relatively well-studied phenomena. And so what we saw here is that for high-performance trials, there seemed to be less activity in this region, which we interpret as the medium was trying to, or not necessarily trying, was just emptying his working memory and maybe becoming more receptive. This is a representation in 3D, so it's just the same thing. Here are these two, high performance, high accuracy and low accuracy, now represented on the 3D map, so we can better see the regions, which show some difference. We also try to instead of just having the high performance trial, low performance trials, we also try to make 3 categories: low accuracy, medium accuracy, and high accuracy. And what we observe is that we had this gradient in terms of spectral power in the theta frequency band. So it seems to be relatively robust to how we partitioned the data. We had a second experiment with these mediums, and we asked them for 1 minute to experience different mental states. So you see here 4 different mental states represented by 4 colors. And R is for recall, so they just had to remember somebody from their family, somebody they knew in their head. They didn't have to verbalize. Perception, they had to listen to a story, so it was read by somebody else. Mediumship, so they had to connect to a deceased individual, and we asked them to connect to the same every time. So they repeated this block of 60 seconds, and we asked them try to connect to the same person. And usually most mediums, they have somebody very used to connect to, so that wasn't a problem. And we also had fabrication, because a lot of skeptics would say, well, they're just making up a story. So we wanted to see, well, if they're making up a story, are they, is that different, the brain activity, compared to when they're doing mediumship? And so this is the average for all the tasks. And so a lot of the tasks are very close. So what we do is we plot the average, and then we plot the deviation from the average. So this is now the deviation from the average. And we can see some differences here. And we did some statistics across all the mediums, and I'm not going to enter the details here, but the bigger the disk, the higher the difference, and then the more blue, it's in one direction versus the others. This was which allow us to see the difference between all the mediums, and also the direction of the difference, and what is statistically significant between all possible pairs of mental states. And what we observe is that all mental states seem to be different. In particular, mediumship, you see here, as much more red than the other ones. The one which were the closest were fabrication and recollection, and perception was also different. So this was these studies. This is in the gamma band, so this is in the high frequency band. And in the paper, we actually argue that there's, it could be potentially some muscle contamination. It's very hard to make interpretation in this frequency band, so it would require additional analysis. We did some additional analysis using an algorithm that's called independent component analysis to try to rule that out, but I don't think we can completely rule it out in that specific example. But even if it is muscle, which we doubt it is, it just shows that their mental states seem to be different, because they could be focusing in a different way, that we contract their facial muscle differently. So you see here, this is ranked number 2 among 100 outputs. It's like the 2 percentile of the most read paper. So this was a wide interest to the scientific community. And there's also the view rank. In Mediumship 2, so this was a follow-up, and we changed the protocol. This protocol was hard, the first one, because even though we had 25 questions, we only had 25 questions. And to achieve high statistical power, we need more trials. So we need either more questions, or in this case, what we decided to do is just to show them pictures and ask them, in this specific case, we just asked them, do you think this person is alive, or do you think this person is deceased? We tested 12 mediums, and we also recorded their brainwaves. So they see, and we spend a lot of time to normalize the image, so they would all be similar. So this is, for example, an original picture. Then we wrote a software to select 4 points on the head. We reframed the picture, converted it to black and white, removed the background with Photoshop, and then we had a rating software to try to assess whether this person was smiling, wearing glasses, not glasses, male, not female. And then we had 3 judges assess all these categories, and we built 2 databases of photos, some of alive and some of deceased individual, that were balanced across all these categories. So balanced across gender, across age, whether they were looking at the camera, whether they were smiling, etc. Because we didn't want the database to be biased. You can imagine, for example, if all the people were alive or smiling, this might be a strong bias in the database if you just answer they're probably alive if they're smiling, so if you have this kind of bias. So the first, as a pilot for this, we started to design this website called Intuition Tester, and you went online, you enter some information about yourself, whether you had some experience with mediumship or not, and then you started to do the task. And so it was loading the picture, And then you are just asked, is this person alive, deceased? Are you sure it's alive or deceased, or you don't know? So we had 5 buttons on the bottom to answer about the individual. So we see here probably living, uncertain, probably deceased, definitely living, etc. Of course, the order is randomized. You also see here the quality is not that good because there were pictures from classroom in 1950s, because we thought there's actually a strong bias when you pick up pictures, because if you pick up pictures from obituaries, of course the people would choose the picture because maybe this person looks sad, etc. There is a strong bias, and we actually showed that when you actually do that, we do observe a strong bias if you just take pictures from obituaries. So here we took pictures of classroom of the 1950s, where there is in theory no bias, and half of the people are deceased, half of the people are still alive. So these were our tests. We had 100 participants in this pilot, and you see we got significant results above 50%. We compare with a robot, so it is significant. It was significant, but it was barely above 50%. And maybe this is because we didn't use professionals. So then we continued this experiments in the lab with professionals, 12 mediums who came, we recorded their brainwaves, and this is their performance. And so you can see all of them are above 50%. There's no reason why they should be above or 50% if they just answer randomly. But all of them were above 50%, except for 2 of them, which are at 49%. And the odds against chance of obtaining such a result, such a bias for positive responses, is actually pretty low at 0.05. So it seemed to show that people were able to detect that some individuals were alive and some individuals were deceased. And you can't rule out some standard explanation, like, for example, even if the pictures were taken like decades before they actually die, maybe just seeing the face, you could infer, oh, this person doesn't look in such a good health. They're going to die sooner than this other person. So you can't rule out this kind of explanation. It just shows that actually we do obtain positive results in this experiment, and that wasn't known before. We also looked at the brainwave results, and especially the very early, what we call event-related potential. So 0 is the presentation of the image. And here you see incorrect and correct answers. And we see a significant difference, of course, after correcting for all the comparisons, at about this latency for the deceased, the image of the deceased individual, which seemed to be related to activity in parietal, occipital regions. And this was just for the pictures of a deceased individual. And this is more representing unconscious processing. So if it's very early visual processing, if it was more in this region at 300 milliseconds, you could consider it, oh, this is more conscious. This is much more unconscious. And of course, this would have to be verified by someone else in different circumstances to see if these results are robust. So we published this in Frontiers, and it was extremely popular. But there is resistance in the field. Here you see, so this was peer reviewed by actually people were not interested, were not in parapsychology. There was a professor in New Zealand and another one in Japan. This was accepted for publication. And the resistance in the field here. Now, what do you say we drop that paranormal data real slow? And so as incredible as it is, the paper was retracted by the editor-in-chief. And so the editor had nothing to say, and the editor-in-chief just retracted the paper. They gave us no reason for why the paper was retracted, except that they said in vague terms that the methodology wasn't meeting their standard. And so we complained, etc. Eventually, they refunded all our fees, etc. So they were, anyway, we republished it in Explore. We also ran some machine learning analysis showing that if we just use machine learning, we can't just based on the picture characteristics classify these images as well as humans do, so that humans might not rely on low-level cues for categorizing these images. And so this is the next experiment. So this is mediumship free. And the problem with the previous experiments, the problem with the previous database was that, so we had these categories of people are alive and people are deceased. And the problem is that people, unfortunately, die all the time. So the database is changing all the time. Also, we are not 100% sure of the accuracy of the information we're getting. And so we had 3 categories of pictures. We had heart attack, car accident, and being shot. And so here, just for fun, I'm going to show you some pictures, and you can take a piece of paper and just write down how do you think this person died. And so I'm going to show you 6 pictures, and then we'll look at the results. And we do that where we actually, sometimes we've done that where we actually have a voting mechanism, so we can get the vote and we can see if people are correct or not. But here it's not set up to do that, so you'll just do it for yourself and see how well you did. And so remember, 3 categories: heart attack, car accident, was shot. So it's per person. How do you think they died? Was it car accident? Was it heart attack? Or was it gunshot? Okay, I'm going to move to the second one. This person: car accident, heart attack, or gunshot. Third person: car accident, heart attack, gunshot. Fourth person: fifth person: and sixth person. And now I'm going to drum roll before I show you the results. So these 2 were heart attack. Then we had these 2 were auto crash, and these 2 were homicide. So it's similar to what we asked the mediums to do. They had more time. It was self-paced, so they had up to 30 seconds to actually make their choice. And so we could choose between one of the 2 categories. And then the position of the buttons was randomized. So when they were showing heart attack, auto crash, or homicide, for each medium, the position was fixed. But for a different medium, the position was randomized. So we wouldn't have auto crash always first, for example. So for this one, we had 12 professional mediums and 12 controls, 200 pictures in 3 categories. So about 67 pictures in each category. We actually had 201 pictures. And we recorded brainwaves using our upgraded system with 64 channels. And again, this is how it looks. Press 1 for heart attack, 2 for a car accident, and 3 for death by firearm. And so these are the results. Here, this is the probability of being. This is the probability. So the chance expectation is about 66% or 23% of being correct, because you have 3 categories, and so 66% of being incorrect. And so here, basically, when you hear, it's a good sign. It means you're above chance expectation, and so we found that. So we had, on average, if we take everybody, the 12 mediums and the 12 controls, we had more, the chance expectations are significant, so 0.02. What was not expected is that mediums seems to be performing, in this case, worse than non-mediums. So mediums were professional mediums, were just actually practicing, and non-mediums were just people we recruited on Craigslist that didn't claim any mediumship ability. They were matched for age and gender with the mediums. When we looked at the brainwaves, so this is the presentation of the image, and this is just average over all the electrodes. It's called the global field power. And we looked at these two peaks here, the early one in conscious processing, and this one which is closer to being conscious. So this is the first row, is this peak, and the second row is this second peak. And what we observe a strong difference between mediums and control in the way that they seem to be processing information differently. We did not observe difference between the correct versus incorrect, for example, here, or the different types of categories. Even though here it looks red, I don't know if you can see my mouse, this didn't resist our statistical analysis when we correct for all the statistical tests we do. We published this recently, last year, in Brain Cognition, and this also has gotten widespread interest, so we're happy with that. And so that's the end of my presentation. I want to thank you for your attention.